With the anti-quota protest taking a violent turn in Bangladesh, the police have now imposed shoot-on-sight orders. Violence across 47 districts in Bangladesh has claimed more than 100 lives, with over 1,500 people injured. Sheikh Hasina's government has announced a nationwide curfew and ordered the deployment of military forces to maintain law and order. Police and paramilitary forces have been deployed across Bangladesh's capital Dhaka to lock down campuses and break up the protests. On the other hand, 978 Indian students have returned home and the curfew and deployment of military forces continues. There were around 15,000 Indians, including 8,500 students in Bangladesh, according to the Ministry of External Affairs. Recently, the Bangladesh police have fired live rounds at the protesters in Dhaka, in which at least one person was wounded among several present for demonstrations held in defiance of the government-imposed curfew. Besides protesting, 300 Bangladeshi police officers have also been injured till now in multiple locations around Dhaka. Telecommunications have been disrupted and television news channels have gone off air. Authorities have cut off mobile telephone services as well in some cases. Student protesters have also stormed a jail in central Bangladesh district and freed inmates before setting the facility on fire, as per a recent police account. Moreover, cops in Dhaka have alleged that the protesters torched, vandalized and carried out destructive activities on numerous police and government offices. Amongst them was the Dhaka headquarters of state broadcaster Bangladesh Television. Amid the violence and chaos, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has cancelled plans to leave the country for diplomatic visits to Spain and Brazil. Meanwhile, the Bangladesh anti-quota protests have reached the United Kingdom, where Bangladeshi community took over the streets. Several men were seen storming a building in Whitechapel, London. Whitechapel is home to large ethnic Bangladeshi population, where a number of cars were damaged and 2 officers were injured as police formed a barrier between the opposing crowds with protective shields. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has also commented on the protests and said that the attacks on the students protesting was shocking and unacceptable. Sheikh Hasina's government is also accused by rights groups of misusing state institutions to entrench its hold on power and stamp out dissent. Students say that they are determined to carry on with the protests despite Sheikh Hasina giving a national address on the now offline state broadcaster seeking to calm the unrest. The students have taken to the streets demanding an end to the quota system that reserves up to 30% of government jobs for relatives of veterans who fought in Bangladesh's War of Independence in 1971 against Pakistan. Under the quota system, government jobs have also been reserved for women, the disabled and members of ethnic minorities. However, students are mainly protesting against jobs reserved for family members of war veterans. Sheikh Hasina's government has halted the quota following the protests in 2018. But last month, the Bangladesh High Court nullified that decision. Sheikh Hasina has defended the quota system, saying that the veterans deserve the highest respect for their contributions in the war. The protests have escalated earlier this week when student activists at Dhaka University clashed with the cops. The students claim that the protests were peaceful until earlier this week, when the Student League of Sheikh Hasina's Awami League party allegedly attacked the protesters. But what do these troubling and developing circumstances in Bangladesh truly mean? I take this conversation forward. I have with me Gautam Mukherjee. We also have with us Ambassador Veena Sikri. Pratim Ranjan Bose. Also with us is Professor Madhav Nalapat. Let me begin with Ambassador Sikri. Ambassador Sikri, of course, India has moved into swift action, bringing back all students and others who may be at this point in time stuck in Bangladesh. But what do you make of very troubling circumstances? Several deaths have been reported. There are visuals that continue to come out on a daily basis. And where do you see these protests now heading? It seems as though the students are pretty adamant on what they want from the government.
I think yes, the situation is very serious, and I think that Indian government has correctly called its own students back, and that part is under control. We are looking after the interests of the Indian students and other residents there, and making sure they're all right. But if you look at the situation on the ground, I think now we have on the streets of Dhaka the political parties. The Shibir, which is the student wing of the Jamaat-e-Islami, has entered the fray, and that is why the Bangladesh Chhatra League is also there. They are clashing, and we can see from the clashes in London as well. These are two political groups. The BNP also is part of the action. It is really a political strife going on. Let me explain why. Yes, there was a quota of 30% for the students, for the freedom fighters, children, and overall there was a quota of 56%, including 30% plus others. In 2018, the government of Sheikh Hasina herself abolished this quota. And she has been supporting
Yes.
for 6 years, for the last 6 years. There was no quota, everything was peaceful. Last month, when the High Court gave the decision, there was a small amount of protest. And actually, the government kept telling them that, look, the government itself has appealed the High Court decision. The government itself has gone to the Supreme Court of Bangladesh, appealing the decision and asking for a favorable outcome that will please everybody. And the government and Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina have been assuring that let the hearing be in the Supreme Court and we will get a decision that will please everybody. And I understand from my sources in Bangladesh that this hearing may start as soon as tomorrow. And in fact, in that hearing in the Supreme Court, some of the students group are party to the government's plea in the Supreme Court, saying that we want a peaceful solution, we want a solution that will please everybody. We don't want this quota to be, such a high quota of 56%. And the students themselves have never demanded an abolition of the quota system. They had asked for a reform of the quota system, and they are prepared to work with the government of Bangladesh in doing this reform and getting a satisfactory solution. But ever since there was a press conference by the Prime Minister on her return from China, and in that press conference, in return, in response to questions, the Prime Minister had said that. Of course, she had explained the whole situation, but she said at one point that, yes, reservations were given to the children of the freedom fighters. It won't be given to the Razakars' children. And that was misquoted, mistaken up by the Shibir. At that point, Shibir entered the fray. At that point, the Bangladesh Chhatra League entered the fray. And that is when this high amount of deaths, hurt of policemen, they also have been hurt because it's a very violent, when the Shibir is in the fray, it's always a very, very violent situation that develops. So I think that while this we recognize completely, this is an internal matter of Bangladesh. It's their students, it's their university, it's their quota and their reform of the quota. But we are naturally worried that there should be peace and stability in Bangladesh. There shouldn't be such a volatile situation. And we hope that as soon as this hearing comes up in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh and in consultation with the students, the matter of the quota will be resolved. The matter of the clashes of the political party representatives, now that is something which the government is trying to bring under control through the curfew, through absolutely, block out in communications. Let's see if that has had any effect. Today was much better than yesterday. Yesterday, it began all right on the Friday, but towards the end of the day, when the political party representatives came on the streets, a jail was burnt in Narsingdi, prisoners were freed, there were other clashes all over, and there were deaths as well, and policemen also got injured. So today, it has again started quietly, but by now, let us see if how the clashes are in different parts of the country. Really hoping that very soon, with the Supreme Court, considering the matter and coming to a decision, this matter will come to a satisfactory conclusion as far as the students are concerned, and that the situation will become peaceful once again.
Right, absolutely. Let me bring in Professor Madhav Nalapat as well. Professor Nalapat, does this now seem like there is some trouble for Sheikh Hasina? And what do you feel, where exactly are these protests then headed? What really is it that the government will have to do at this point in time? Because like I said, the situation does seem very troubling. The fact that internet services have been cut off and troubling reports continue to pour in from the ground situation in Bangladesh.
Well, I'd like to point out, Devika, this is just one more example of trying to win elections without elections on the streets. We saw that play out in multiple countries. I mean, during the Arab Spring, for example, we have seen it play out in Ukraine, where there was trouble on the streets and there was no election, but the elected president was deposed and the whole government structure was changed. Now, Volker Turk may be very upset about what's happening to students of Bangladesh. I wonder what Volker Turk would say if there were very extremist organizations in the United States that infiltrate the movements and then create this kind of mayhem and violence, burning down prisons, releasing prisoners, and as correctly been said by the ambassador, the source of the trouble are the families of the Razakars. The Razakars are those who supported the Pakistan military in its genocide of Bangladesh. At that time, unfortunately, China, the US, and many countries in Europe also supported the genocide in Bangladesh. But Sheikh Hasina's family paid a terrible price. So the Razakars have been behind it. Now, I'm not surprised about riots in the UK because you've seen in the UK a very permissive atmosphere, frankly, for this kind of rioting and for the very extremist rhetoric at this kind of rioting. And you've seen what's happening what's happening in Leeds is an example of that. I simply want to say very clearly that I see nothing wrong in a quota given for those who sacrificed their lives for the sake of the freedom of their people from slavery, virtue, second-class status, completely, and on which a genocide was committed. And I'd like to say that so far, Razaka families have escaped completely, like their parents and grandparents who participated in the genocide have escaped completely, because there were no human rights tribunals against them, no war crimes tribunals against them. And in my view, that's not a very, that's not a very good precedent for India to have set when there was obvious genocide and the Indian army stood behind the Mukti Bahini in liberating the people of Bangladesh from the genocide, but not a single Pakistani officer or a soldier, not a single soldier was held accountable for the widespread genocide that took place. Frankly, this is what is happening there, and I'm sorry to say, several Western countries are standing with these violent individuals. I think they're also, in that sense, giving tacit support to regime change through the streets. But the reality is that Sheikh Hasina is a strong leader, a popular leader. She has come to power through the vote. And if she's using firm measures, because the situation should not be allowed to go into a situation where the whole of Bangladesh faces a meltdown and external investment dries up and domestic investment dries up and the economy crashes, which is basically the objective of those fighting her, whether it's extremist groups like the Razakars or whether it is an opposition political party, very closely linked to the extremist groups, and also consisting very largely of people who supported the genocide in Bangladesh rather than opposed it. Devika.
Right, absolutely. Let me bring in Mr. Pratim Bose into the conversation as well. Mr. Bose, what do you feel of what's happening in Bangladesh right now? And like I said, India, of course, has been very proactive. Several people have been brought back, but the situation does continue to seem rather troubling. It's been over a week of protests in Bangladesh, and it does not seem as though the students and the government have been able to come to any sort of conclusion.
Devika, I have, I'm partly in agreement with Ambassador and Professor, and to some extent I'll differ. This quota thing, the basic problem is in Bangladesh, there is a very inherent problem. First of all, if you look at it, Professor is right that there has, and both Ambassador has also pointed out that there are always street fights to change, regime change. This is very common in Bangladesh. If you notice carefully, in 2013, there was a bloody riot in Bangladesh. So it keeps happening there, particularly before election. But this time it is happening after election, so that is there is a desperation on that count. Now, having said that, it is very clear that there are a couple of things are very clear. Number one is that Bangladesh has a problem with its democratic institutions, and I think must say this that Sheikh Hasina hasn't really helped in improving the trustworthiness of the democratic institutions. So that creates a basic problem inside. But over here, what exactly happened is this started as a student protest, and the government has been in power for consecutive. This is the fourth term, and this long stay in power brought in arrogance, and they lost. They let go every opportunity for early negotiation, and the way things were happening, like if you notice the press briefing after of Sheikh Hasina, you will notice that she said everything, but that one comment she made that and well, it is about that is there is a political philosophy behind that. But having done so, within 6 hours, the protest started in Dhaka University. Now, what it means is that these these protesters were on street for last the 2 weeks prior that, and during the period, the opponent camp, and very particularly, yes, the Jamaat is the prime player here because they have the strength, and they were ready to lap up the situation, and they jumped into it. So the government actually, what happened is that they missed the bus the first couple of days, and then by that time they built the narrative, and this the London protests or UK protests. What he was saying is that is Tariq Rahman is based out of there, and he has been before the election he has hired some ex-diplomats and etc etc. He has built a huge lobby there, so that is just expected. So if you go by the whole publicity of this camp, that had been pretty smooth, and they built a perception that the killings are taking place, that the police and Awami League are killing people. Interestingly, if you look at Pratham Alo, yesterday's paper, you will see they quoted 11 students died out of 32 or 37, the number that they had given. That takes us to the question that why then there are so many non-students into the death list, and who killed them? If you go by the protesters' admission or submission, you will see that the police was blamed for a few deaths, one or two, that Abu Said, that man who was standing and then got shot. In that case, police was blamed by the students. But that day, 6 persons died, and students said that person, only one person, they said that he died because of police firing. So here is a case, here is a very interesting mystery. Who are firing the bullets and who are dying? Simple commoners who have nothing to do with protests have died. It is clearly a case now. The whole thing has gone out of the paradigm of the student protest and anything. It is, and they are saying this is an war to bring down the government. And if they can create the lawlessness, what happened yesterday at Narsingdi is something very dangerous. They actually freed some terrorists even. So they want to create the chaos and bring down the government. This week, after tomorrow's Supreme Court will definitely stay the High Court judgment, and after that we will see if the army does its job well. We can expect that situation to come down next week. But if it doesn't, then I believe there is a serious problem for Sheikh Hasina as well as India awaiting.
Okay, all right. Gautam Mukherjee, bringing you into the conversation and taking that point forward, if some sort of a conclusion is not reached next week, do you feel that it is then a troubling sign? And what is it that India then needs to keep in mind going forward?
Well, there is, of the previous panelists have pointed out that this is not the first time that Hasina is facing a challenge from the opposition, basically the Islamic radicals, supported presumably by Pakistan, China, and other inimical forces who are financing them and egging them on, organizing them. And Hasina is determined, as always, to crush this. And Yesterday's numbers were 39. Today's numbers of dead people are 105. The fact is, it is a attempt to overthrow the government, and this will not be allowed, that's for certain. The army is out there, and they have been given the orders to shoot at sight. And this will go on. I don't think there's going to be any squeamishness on the part of the government in terms of how many people they kill in order to bring this to a heel. And I also believe that this is the only way, because you cannot have regime change by rioting. This implication is dangerous for India as well, where many of the opposition people have threatened at various times to riot. Some of them have indulged in arson, certainly in blockading and in occupation, illegal occupations. So we have taken in India a much softer line of defensive, action, because our people are not so homogeneous. They are of different castes, different races almost, and different political affiliations. There is, as in Bangladesh, a lot of foreign infiltration, money, instigation, aided and abetted by the opposition. But we have handled it usually and up to now without this kind of rigid bloodshed. Now, in Bangladesh, you've basically got a homogeneous population. You've got all Sunnis at work. Some are with the Awami League, others are extreme on the other side. There are no Shias, none to speak of, and there are no other ethnic and religious issues at the back of it. What it is a pure and simple attack on the government by illegal means, by anarchy. And it will be stopped, and that's all there is to it. I am confident of that. Having said that, people in Europe, factions of Bangladeshis in London, and similar ones in Europe as well as in America, may well protest and include violent protest. It is partially because of a left liberal mistake, as it's turning out in more and more countries. You've got this happening in Germany, you've got this happening in France, you've got this happening in Britain. The vice president designate of Trump called Britain a Islamic republic, just after he was, anointed, as it were.
Yes.
So the situation is serious in America. Muslims are buying up the old unused churches because there's less and less interest amongst the Christians in regular religion, and they're turning them into mosques. And if this is allowed and this is, not checked, what will happen is this is where they organize from the mosques. They also, in due course, start stocking arms and ammunition in the mosques. So the West has a way to change their methodology. Otherwise, there will be bloodshed there just as much as there is in Iran or in Bangladesh. So it must be looked at purely in terms of a threat to the government that is not acceptable and will be crushed.
Right, absolutely. I've run out of time. I thank all of our panelists for joining us, because my colleague Rening Datta has spoken to several Bangladeshi people who have come to Kolkata for medical treatment, but they're now doubtful about whether they will be able to return to their country. Out of these people, my colleague has also spoken to a person who comes from the family of freedom fighters. Let's listen in to these conversations. We leave you with what these people have had to say.
दिन पे दिन बिगड़ बांग्लादेश का परिस्थिति दिन पे दिन बिगड़ रहा है। और उसी बीच में बांग्लादेश छोड़कर बहुत सारे लोग कोलकाता में आ रहे हैं ट्रीटमेंट करने के लिए, बहुत सारे खुद का काम करने के लिए। ऐसा ही लोग हम लोगों के साथ है। दादा, आपका नाम क्या है?
मेरा नाम दिलवर हुसैन।
तो दादा, आप कब आए बांग्लादेश से कोलकाता
अभी
में?
आया
आज ही आए
जी। अभी
तो क्या मकसद लेकर आए हैं, क्या क्या पर्पस है कोलकाता आने का?
मेरे का ट्रीटमेंट करने का है, हमारे कमर में दर्द है, लेकिन बांग्लादेश का हालत बहुत अच्छा नहीं है। उधर बहुत आंदोलन चल रहा है और स्टूडेंट लोग उसका दाबी मानने के लिए रास्ता में खड़ा हुआ। अभी तो 144 धारा जारी हुआ, उधर बहुत हंगामा हो रहा है। हम लोग विलेज में था, विलेज से आया, हम लोग का बॉर्डर के पास ही हम लोगों का घर, लेकिन शहर का जो सिटी का हालत हम लोग को उतना पता नहीं आ रहा है। लेकिन नेटवर्क नहीं है हम लोगों का, नेटवर्क मोबाइल का नेटवर्क नहीं है, लेकिन वो जो इंटरनेट के कनेक्शन अभी काट गया। तो बांग्लादेश के साथ अभी तक कोई कनेक्शन नहीं किया।
तो परिवार के साथ बातचीत कुछ हुआ? उधर का
हाँ।
परिस्थिति क्या है, मालूम पड़ा कुछ?
अभी आया, उधर का हालत अच्छा है। हम लोगों के ग्राम में इतना प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, इधर अच्छा है, लेकिन उधर का क्या हुआ हम लोग को पता नहीं है, शहर में क्या हो रहा है।
तो आपको क्या लगता है इस तरीके का जो मूवमेंट चल रहा है बांग्लादेश में, आपको क्या लगता है कि जल्द से जल्द शांत होने के लिए क्या क्या करना चाहिए, क्या होना चाहिए?
ये तो बहुत खराब बात है, लेकिन स्टूडेंट लोग जो मांग रहे हैं वो देना चाहिए गवर्नमेंट को। मैं भी एक फ्रीडम फाइटर का घर का है, मेरा बाबा एक फ्रीडम फाइटर, लेकिन मेरा भी मकसद है वो लोग जो मांग रहे हैं देना चाहिए, लेकिन हम लोग क्या करेंगे, हम लोग तो कुछ नहीं बोल सकते।
और भी बहुत सारे लोग कोलकाता में बांग्लादेश आते हैं सिर्फ ट्रीटमेंट कराने के लिए। मैं एक बार दिखाऊंगा कि बहुत सारे लोग हॉस्पिटल के बाहर बैठे हुए हैं और ट्रीटमेंट करने के बाद वो लोग बांग्लादेश में वापस जाने का प्लानिंग तो कर रहे थे, मगर किस तरीके से वो पहुंचे, किस तरीके से वो जाएगा, यही अभी उन लोगों का टेंशन है। एक बार बात करूंगा। सर, कबे আপনাদের বাংলাদেশ ফেরার কথা ছিল?
আগামীকালকে ফেরার কথা, কিন্তু ফিরতে তো পারছি না, গাড়ি তো সব বন্ধ, নেটওয়ার্ক বন্ধ, যোগাযোগ বন্ধ আজ 3 দিন থেকে। এর জন্য আমরা আতঙ্কের মধ্যে আছি যে এই জিনিসটা ফয়সালা কবে হবে। ফয়সালা হলে হয়তো আমরা গাড়ি ঘোড়া চললে আমরা যেতে পারবো।
मैं पूछ रहा था कि उन लोगों का कब घर लौटने का बात था। वो बोल रहे हैं कि कल उनका घर लौटने का बात था, मगर अभी तक जो सिचुएशन है, घर के साथ कोई कांटेक्ट नहीं है, कोई इंटरनेट परिषेवा नहीं है, और उसके साथ साथ ही घर लौटने का कोई बंदोबस्त भी नहीं है। अभी वो लोग सोच रहे हैं कि कब ये पूरा घटना शांत हो, बांग्लादेश शांत हो, उसके बाद ही वो घर लौट पाएंगे। और भी लोगों के साथ मैं बात करूंगा। दादा, आपका कौन से मकसद से वो आप कोलकाता आए थे, कब आए थे, এখন কি পরিকল্পনা, মানে পরবর্তীতে কি যাবেন?
গতকালকে আসি, তারপরে আগামীকালকে আর প্ল্যান আছে, কিন্তু যেতে পারবো কি বলতে পারছি না। পরিস্থিতি খারাপ, সারা দেশে ধরেন আপনার নেটওয়ার্ক বন্ধ, তারপরে গন্ডগোল হয়েছে, অনেকে মারা গেছে, বুঝছেন, গাড়ি ঘোড়া চলছে না। তো এই পরিস্থিতি আসি, একটা আতঙ্কের ভিতরে আছে, বাচ্চারা সব রয়েছে। তারপরে ধরেন ঔষধ ডাক্তার যে ট্রিটমেন্ট করার জন্য আসিছি, আগামীকালকে যাবো, যাওয়ার পরে এখন তার যেতে পারবো কি, এটা একটা আতঙ্কের ভিতরে আছে, নিশ্চিন্তের ভিতরে।
कल वो लोग कोलकाता आए थे, कोलकाता आने के बाद ट्रीटमेंट कराया, उसके बाद कल यानी अगले दिन उनका घर वापस जाने का प्लानिंग था, मगर ये अभी का जो सिचुएशन उनको मालूम पड़ा है, उसके साथ वो कह रहे हैं कि उनको मालूम नहीं है कि कल घर पर जा पाएगा कि नहीं, घर का परिस्थिति क्या है वो भी मालूम नहीं। यानी बांग्लादेश का जो परिस्थिति, वो परिस्थिति को देखते हुए वो लोग अभी टेंशन में है कि किस तरीके से वो घर वापस जा पाएगा। मैं एक बार दिखाऊंगा। ठीक, मेरे साथ और भी लोग खड़े हैं इधर, जो लोग बांग्लादेश से है। दादा, আপনি কোথা থেকে এসেছেন?
শ্যামনগর থানার সাতক্ষীরা ডিস্ট্রিক্ট,
বাংলাদেশের।
বাংলাদেশে।
তো কবে এসেছিলেন?
আমি 1 সপ্তাহ হচ্ছে আসছি।
এ- এখন যা পরিস্থিতি, তাতে কখন ফিরতে পারবেন বা কিভাবে ফিরতে পারবেন সেই নিয়ে কি চিন্তায় রয়েছেন?
অবশ্যই চিন্তা আছে, নির্দিষ্ট কোনো কিছু বোঝা যাচ্ছে না আর কি।
वो लोग कह रहे हैं कि एक हफ्ता पहले वो लोग आए थे, उसके बाद जो ट्रीटमेंट का प्रक्रिया, वो ट्रीटमेंट का प्रक्रिया की है, मगर वो लोग घर जब लौटेगा, किस तरीके से घर लौटेगा, क्या क्या परिकल्पना है, क्या क्या स्थिति है उधर का, वो उन लोगों को मालूम नहीं है। वो लोग चिंतित है कि किस तरीके से वो कोलकाता से बांग्लादेश में फिर से वापस जाए, यही टेंशन लेकर वो लोग बैठे हुए हैं और वेट कर रहे हैं कि कब बांग्लादेश का जो परिस्थिति, वो परिस्थिति शांत हो और वो लोग घर वापस जा पाए। कैमरा पर्सन अमित धनुक के साथ रोनित दत्तो, इंडिया न्यूज, कोलकाता।
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.